right, so the creative process. Now, creativity is a weird thing in landscape photography. We're not really creating something from nothing. We're taking something that exists, something that exists as we see it in front of us, and then finding a way to interpret that. And it's in that interpretation that our creative process exists. Everything from where we choose to stand to what lens we use to how we frame the scene and then how we expose it is all part of the creative process. So I thought a lot about this video and how to define it, because for me, it's not really a step-by-step process. The scene, as well as my state of mind, determine how I approach it. But in every scene, there are factors, things that I take into account that are pretty much always the same. So in this video, I want to try to break down my creative process when I'm out in the field shooting, from the seed of seeing something that inspires me and through the different stages of turning that into an image. For me, every image starts with being inspired to visit a particular place and photograph there. And in this video, I want to look at how it works when you go to a place that you're interested in for one reason or another, but you don't have a specific image in mind that you want to shoot. Now, what we find interesting is different in everyone. Personally, I'm fascinated and inspired by large, epic scenes, epic landscapes. Places that feel almost elemental, as though they've been there forever. Deserts, for example, are places that I'm always drawn to photographing, and for years I wanted to head to the deserts of the southwest of the US to shoot there. Now, on that trip, there were some places that we visited that I'd already seen images from, and in these places, making the image was really all about finding the different elements for the composition. The subject itself was pretty much one that I'd already identified before going there. And in those cases, the elements that go into making the images are things I've kind of already discussed before in composition videos that I've made. So that's not really what I want to talk about in terms of the creative process. But while we were there and driving around, we kept seeing these blue shale slopes at the foot of the mesas. And that's kind of where it starts. You don't necessarily straight away see an image, but you see the elements that you think you can make an image from. And in this case, it was the triangles, which are strong compositional shape, and lots of very regular diagonal slopes with leading lines along the spines of these small hills. And this triggers that thing in your head where you think, okay, I think maybe there's an image here. Now, these slopes were everywhere in the area where we were staying. So the next step was to look at Google Maps and see if we could find an area which we could access and which had a lot of photographic potential. And by photographic potential, I mean that it was clean of other elements that might ruin compositions. Things like roads, buildings, power lines, landscape elements that didn't necessarily contribute to the scene, and where there was harmony in the arrangement of the landscapes. Now, Google Maps is a fantastic tool for identifying interesting landscapes and finding places to set up. I use it a lot. In this case, we found an area that looked like it would have lots of potential for aerial images with interesting valleys that were all in converging lines. And then it was just a case of going there and moving on to the steps that I'll talk about next. Things like finding the composition, finding the mood. But the primary stage here was heading to an area that I find inspiring, the deserts of the Southwest. And then as we were driving around, it's just really about keeping my eyes open, keeping my mind open, then just noticing things, noticing something that had elements that work for an image. And that's a huge seed of all inspiration, noticing the landscape, seeing the landscape, not necessarily looking for pretty things or whatever, but being aware of the elements of a landscape that will work in an image. And the more you do that, then the easier it gets. Okay, so once you've found a place or something that inspires you to photograph it, the next step is how you are going to compose it. Now, I've talked a lot about composition in quite a few videos that I've made. As for me, it's the most important aspect of photography and perhaps the hardest to master and to understand. But I don't want to go over the same things that I've talked about in previous videos here. What I want to do is look at this from the point of view of the creative process and decisions that you have to make. So the first thing is understanding the fundamental structure of the image. What is it that inspires you and how can you best show that? Is it the whole wide vista? And if it is there one element in there that you can build the image around? Something like a mountain peak or a tree? Or is it just the general scene, the way the landscape flows? Or is it something smaller that's caught your eye, a repeating pattern or a shape in the landscape, or the way that two elements complement each other or balance each other? To do this, to see this, you have to open yourself to the landscape, to really look at it, to see if there's something that can anchor the image, a main subject, something which sometimes can be really big and obvious, or sometimes it can be a tiny small element that works because it contrasts and so it pulls your eye towards it. Sometimes there's not really a singular subject, sometimes it's the whole landscape, and on these occasions I'll look for shapes or lines, things that flow together and elements that work together. In both these occasions, what you leave out is just as important as what you include in the composition, and it's here that lens choice and focal length come into play. With a wide angle lens, you're going to include everything in the landscape that's in front of you. So this focal length works usually if you've got three really strong elements: a strong main subject that doesn't get lost in the image, a foreground that supports the subject, and finally a good sky, as the sky will almost always be the background of any wide angle image. And then you need to get the foreground to connect with the subject, which is usually much further back in the image. And this is usually going to require walking around, looking for foregrounds, getting higher, getting lower, to find a way to connect these two elements together so the eye moves from one to the other. And that's part of the creative process, identifying that anchor, that main subject, and then walking around trying to find a foreground that supports it. Now, one thing that I find that helps me with this particular process is using the wide angle lens on my phone, as this allows me to move around really freely and try different heights and different ways of framing the elements. But wide angle images like that are just one template, and many scenes don't have foregrounds, or they don't have great skies or subjects that need support. They don't necessarily work as a wide angle, and it's important that you don't become fixated on one particular element or one particular way of doing things or framing things. Just because you have a good sky, it doesn't mean that you have to include it if it doesn't work with the other elements. Only include it if it works with the subject that you're shooting. Only include a foreground if you can find a decent one, or one that works to support the main subject. If not, then exclude it. If you include something that doesn't support the image, then for sure it's actually going to detract from it. Not every landscape needs a foreground or a sky. Lots of scenes are actually stronger without them. A huge part of the creative process for me is asking myself, what am I trying to show here? What am I actually shooting? And then honestly evaluating if including other elements actually make it better or weaker. Don't get hung up on a particular template or way of shooting. Every scene works differently, so look at the scene and try to reduce it to its essential elements. Very often, the best way to show a scene is to just show a small part of it that represents the whole, to remove elements and make a simple, more minimal composition that distills the scene to what is basically its essence, to what's essential about that landscape. For scenes like this, then a telephoto lens works best, just trying to include one or maybe two elements in the frame. But sometimes to get to this stage, we have to start wider. We have to start with the big scene and then just keep subtracting, refining the composition, reducing the scene, and using the viewfinder to analyze whether the image works or not, and if we need to keep subtracting more or including more in the frame. All right, so talking about planning, about composition, these are tangible aspects of making images. But a huge part of the creative process is your state of mind. And this is relevant at every level, from making yourself get up at a ridiculous time in the morning, pushing yourself along a trail, to the level of expectation that you carry with you when you go out shooting, and just the general feelings that you have in your head when you're out doing photography. All of it has a huge effect on the way that you're going to make images. I think the first thing to do when you're out shooting is to try to clear your mind of expectation. Now, it may be that you're visiting a place that you've been really inspired to shoot and wanted to go there for a long time, but the chances of it being exactly as you've imagined when you get there, or like the photos that you've seen, are pretty much impossible. It's not going to be like that. Disappointment is a byproduct of what happens when something fails to meet your expectations. So the first thing to do when you arrive anywhere is to arrive there with an open mind. But it's not just potential disappointment, being really excited about being in a place, or being in a scene that really inspires you. Everything is so good that you get really anxious about messing it up and not capturing it, or even the leftover adrenaline or or tiredness from a really long hike. All of this crowds into your mind and makes it harder to focus and makes it much harder to get your mind into a creative space. So you need to slow down, to breathe. Don't immediately reach for a camera and try to start shooting. Just spend some time looking at the place and absorbing it. Immediately getting your camera out of your bag, it can anchor you to a spot, and that's doubly true if you set your tripod up. This can cause this kind of tunnel vision where you don't really see the scene, only the tiny part of it that you expected to see, or the bit that caught your eye when you first arrive, and you miss so much like that. You need to slow down and take a breath, clear your mind, look around and try not to get fixated on one particular scene, on one particular thing. And the best way to do this is to give yourself time by getting there early. Landscape photography requires patience, and not just in waiting for the light, but in dealing with things like expectation, things like disappointment, frustration at the weather or whatever. All of this plays into the experience of being in a place, and it's very easy for negative feelings or being anxious at missing a shot to feed into every aspect of what you're doing. Things like maybe your camera does something expected and you can't work out what it's doing can stop you in your tracks, and you can become so fixated on that that you actually forget why you're there. So for me, the key is just trying to keep a calm mind, because without this, it's pretty much impossible to have the mental bandwidth to be creative, to see the scene, to find the elements that work, to create harmony in the composition, to notice things that maybe aren't working in your composition. Things like the exposure, you need to have a clarity of mind, and the key to that is just taking your time and slowing down. It almost never happens that the first time you frame a scene that you absolutely nail the composition. It almost always needs to be refined. And to do this, you need to be aware with all of your senses connected to what you're doing, to the light, to the way the different elements of the landscape are flying, to the weather, or any potential issues, things that are maybe like creeping into the edge of your frame. So your state of mind really is important. And of course, it's really easy to say, try not to be anxious, try to keep a calm and open mind and be calm. It's really easy to say that. But of course, it's much harder to do that in reality when you're excited, when you're out of breath, or when you're frustrated. So the first practical thing to do is to get to a location early, then sit down, drink some water, eat a cereal bar, whatever. Look around and leave your camera in the bag. Having the time just to do that is the first step to calming your mind down and putting it in a place where you can start to think about framing a scene and start being creative. Now, I know that when I make a video like this, it's very easy to, in order to try to explain something, to break it down and divide it up into easily digestible chunks. When in reality, all the aspects that I've mentioned, things like composition, things like state of mind and inspiration, they aren't linear steps or separate things to pass through. They all overlap each other. They're all happening at the same time. And this is definitely true of the mood of an image, because it's this mood and the emotion that you have, that feeling that will inform every aspect of creating the image. Now, I've always believed that when we're at a place, we're not really taking the photograph of the place, but we're more attempting to capture the way that that place makes us feel. And so we can go to the same place on different occasions and come away with very different images each time. The way a place makes you feel will affect the way that you expose an image, whether you lean darker or lighter in your exposure. It affects the composition as well. For example, in a place like Dedvlei in Namibia, now for me, this place is all about the intimacy of that location, of these trees that have stood there in this place for hundreds of years. So I compose it with a telephoto lens, cutting out the sky, cutting out most of the foreground, and keeping the trees prominent in the composition. In Hokkaido, there's a simpleness in the winter landscapes there. There's just this pure whiteness of the snow that really influences my mood, and that makes me lean into bright exposures without shadows, clean, simple compositions. On the other hand, heavy clouds in Iceland make me lean the other way towards darker, more moody images, and so I'll expose accordingly. I'll expose darker and try to find darker elements of the landscape that I can frame the image with. Up on the mesas of the southwest and in the deserts, the scale of the landscape there is massive. There's just this sense of awe at the vastness of the space. And so I'll lean towards using a wide angle to try to convert that epic scale with lots of sky and a distance that just goes on and on and on. But then in the abandoned mining town of Kommenskop in Namibia, I wanted to capture the isolation, the passing of time. So finding rooms without footprints flowing through them was my biggest concern there. So whenever I'm on location, I try to tune into what the feel of that place is, whether it's filling me with awe, whether it's claustrophobic or intimate. What's the best way of capturing that? And again, this is inextricably connected with your state of mind, with your inspiration. And like those things, it requires a bit of space and time to tune into. And once I have that, then the other aspects of the process become much clearer. Which lens to use, how to think about framing, as well as decisions about exposure and stuff like that. And when it comes to exposure, this is really something you need to get right at the time, even if you shoot in RAW. I'm not talking about simply brightening or darkening the file in post-processing. What I mean here is the mood that you choose to show will reflect the way that you shoot a scene. A dark image will probably embrace shadows, and it's very hard to change that in post to give it a brighter feel. A brighter image probably won't include many shadows. It will lean towards the highlights and the brighter midtones. And once you've done that, it's very difficult then to introduce darkness into that to make it a moodier image. So you need to be aware when you're on the scene. Post-processing is a really important part of the creative process, but you should never think that you can change an image from what it is, from how it is when you feel it. For me, post-processing should be used to enhance the mood that you captured in camera and to bring that out. So it's important that when I'm in the field, I'm aware of what that mood is and how I can capture that in camera, but then also to think ahead what the edited image can look like. The best images have an intentionality that flow through every aspect of how you make them. Whereas just pointing my camera to something pretty and then hoping I can make something of it later, for me, that just never works. So that's it for this video. I hope it's been useful, or at the very least interesting. It's one of those videos where everything can feel a bit abstract and intangible. And to be honest, trying to define the different processes that are happening in my head when I'm out shooting, it's been a bit of a challenge when I was writing the script for this video. But if you've got any comments or any questions, just drop them down below and I'll get back to you. And if you have enjoyed it, please like, please subscribe, because it really does help the channel. And if you like my photography and you enjoy my approach, why not join me on a workshop? I've been leading workshops all over the world for over 10 years now, and we're constantly refining the way that we put our tours together and heading to some really, really stunning places. We're just launching some of our 2026 and 2027 workshops now. We've got tours coming up to Utah, to Alaska, Madeira, Namibia, Botswana, and Japan. And you can find full information on all my tours on my website. So drop me a line if you're interested in joining us. And as ever, take care and good luck with all your photography. I'll see you next time. See ya.